I know no rest. Welcome to a new project. I feel like I am very event-based, and so I realized that I had my friend's wedding coming up, and I thought, what a great opportunity to push myself. That really is the honors for this year. I really want to learn new skills, make new things, continuously push myself, because I feel like in the most recent years, I put myself in a box. I made a lot of late Victorian walking skirts, late Victorian bodices, and the construction is pretty much all the same. And even though you can learn a lot through decoration and practice, I feel like I kind of hit a plateau there, and I want to continuously develop my skills and make different things. And so I decided to challenge myself to try and make a couture inspired dress for my friend's wedding. I actually already had some fabric in place for this in my stock. I bought it last year to try and make a dress for another friend's wedding, but that didn't happen. But since I had a little bit of time, I decided to slot in this project in between my big 1890s evening ball gown kind of project and the time of the wedding, which gave me, I think, just around 3 weeks to make this, which seems a little tight, but I think can work. So, the reasoning behind this project is that I wanted to make a modern-ish couture-inspired dress to wear to a wedding. So it has to be formal. I wanted to challenge myself by using materials that I don't typically work with and methods that I don't typically work with, and also different patterns. So I've done a lot of online browsing to try and get an idea of what I wanted, because even though I knew I wanted it to have a few things, number one, I wanted to have a full skirt, I wanted to have some more vintage lines, and I wanted it to be couture adjacent at least, because as I'll explain, you can't really make couture at home just based on the definition of it. So I shopped around for ages to find a pattern, and I actually ended up buying this 1950s slip pattern, and that's because it had kind of all of the style lines I wanted, which included a sort of v-neck. I wanted it to be a little sexy, I guess, but not too much because it's the wedding. But I thought that kind of v-neck would be really nice, and it had a fuller skirt, and it was also a simple pattern. So I thought this has kind of the silhouette. I could make a mock-up, and then I can alter it if I need to make it a little bit extra if it doesn't work out. So my 1950s slip pattern came in. It is a quite simple pattern in the sense that it has one bodice, obviously it has one bodice, but it has two pattern pieces for the bodice. Basically, it has the front and the back. The front is fitted with two darts, one at the bust and one at the waist, and then the skirt is a very basic sort of 3/4 circle skirt made out of panels. So there's one panel for the front and one panel for the back. Because this is intended as a slip dress to be underneath dresses, it has the simplest style lines. It has quite a low cut front and back so that it can adjust to different styles of outer dresses. So I thought it'd be the perfect starting point. So this is what this video is going to be, is about making a toile, a mock-up for this pattern, but I wanted particularly to make it a wearable mock-up. So instead of investing so much fabric and yardage, I thought I could invest it into making a dress that would be also wearable as a slip. So I get two things out of this. I get a mock-up for the final dress and a 1950s slip that could be used across different projects. So for this project, my fabric is actually just a linen. I have a lot of this plain white linen in my stash, and I thought it would be a really good use for this because linen is, number one, lightweight, but it's also the choice fabric historically for undergarments, things like chemises, petticoats, and that's because it has natural moisture wicking properties, which means it will keep your body cool and dry. And so I thought this would be the perfect material for this dress. It will close on the side with a zipper, so that leaves the back and the front obviously a bit freer depending on what I want the final pattern to be like. And it will also have a pocket, and that is because I know it's intended as a slip, but maybe it could also work as an outer dress. I've seen a lot of recent trends in this, so yeah. I wanted to give a quick note that this is an original 1950s pattern that comes in a size that's not mine. And if you, like me, have browsed a lot of vintage patterns, you might notice that a lot of their sizing is, or at least of the patterns that survive cannot match our modern bodies. that's okay. This pattern in particular should be quite easy to size up, and that is because it has very simple style lines. So usually, and I've done this for a couple of vintage patterns in the past, depending on the style lines, depending on your design, if there's nothing in the front, what you really want to do is to mess with the sides, because usually the proportions, actually, you want to keep the neckline proportions depending on the size of that you're sizing it up to. So for mine, I actually have to add about 4 inches to the bust and the waist, which is quite a big alteration. But for this, I have 4 seams to divide that extra through, and I've decided to just add it to the side seams. I'm going to do that for my mock-up, and then I'll see if that actually works well or not. Always make a mock-up if you're altering the dimensions and proportions of your pattern. But it should be quite straightforward, thankfully, with such simple style lines. So I've added about 1 inch to each of the side seams, both for the skirt and the top. And I've also just double-checked the length, the vertical length as well, between the under bust and the waist, and that's because I'm typically quite short-waisted, and so I've also taken about 1/2 inch out there. And this is important because there are bust darts, so you want your bust darts to finish on or below your bust line, depending on what you want that to be like. And so I just want to make sure that they're positioned correctly, and by that I needed to shorten the length slightly. But I did all of this prep work before I cut out my mock-up to ensure that my first mock-up fit me, and then I did a mock-up out of scrap fabric just of the bodice, because that's the bit that has any fitting to it, and I quite liked it, and I think it worked out well. I also wanted to ensure that it has a little bit of ease to be comfortable. I didn't want it to be too tight, and I was quite pleased with that mock-up. So I think I'm happy to go ahead and cut out my linen and get started with this project. Apologies for this weird angle, but this is the only way that I can show you the full pattern in my sewing room floor. So I wanted to show you the difference between the vintage pattern, which you can see here at the top, and then my tracing and altered one for my own body. So the most important thing to keep in mind is that usually these papers are very fragile. So what I do, I very rarely ever actually trace commercial patterns, but because these usually do need quite a few alterations because of the sizing, I do trace vintage patterns, and I prefer to do the alterations on there. And that includes the perforations. So if you're new to working with vintage patterns, they're not printed. They instead have like a code of perforations, which are then usually described in the instructions to what they do. Usually it's things like stitching lines, grain lines, darts, things like that. So I make sure to transfer all of that. And then what I do is I check the measurements here, according to the size and the type of garment it is, and then I compare these to my own measurements and see what I have to add. So this was actually pretty straightforward for the skirt. I just added 1 inch at the front and sides to each one, which means that I added a total of 8 inches to the waist. Very, very normal. You don't need to add it all the way down if you only need it at the waist, but I could use with the room at the hip as well, so I did, although, yeah, I didn't actually measure the hip because it does flare out, so I thought that'd be fine. The other thing I adjusted was the bust and the waist. So the waist, actually, I added slightly less than to the skirt. There's about 1 inch to 1 inch and a bit on either side. I also have to shorten the back because these side seams just weren't matching up after the dart was sewn on this side. This was way too long. I have no idea what they meant for in the original pattern. And then the other thing I did was that I traced the darts exactly as they were, but then I took them in a little bit by about 1/4 inch on either side, including the bust, just to give a little bit more room there without actually having to add to the pattern. And I did a mock-up and it fit fine, so I'm going to proceed with this. I also just wanted to point out that I've measured, and this is still floor length to me, but you can see I've already taken 6 inches away from the original tracing, so just make sure you do also keep height in mind, because to me that would be like a huge waste of fabric to be cutting out when I don't actually need it, especially if I'm not doing like a folded large hem. So yeah. It's not too difficult, don't be put off by working with vintage patterns. Usually you can, especially for simpler designs, you can just add bits at the seam allowances and things. If you need to add more, there's like slash and spread methods, but yeah, I thought for now I'd just show you what they look like.
My first step was, of course, to cut out the fabric. Because this pattern is so simple and has so few pieces, I was able to use a scrap of linen that measured approximately 1.5 meters. next step was to transform my darts, the most important fitting aspect of the bodice. For this, I used the tracing wheel and then traced the little perforations left on the fabric with the heat vanishing pen. But do beware, because sometimes these pens can leave a residue, especially noticeable on light fabrics. I pinned my darts very carefully. Usually I do baste these, but for this I didn't bother. The darts are sewn by machine. A good tip for this is to make sure you do not backstitch at the tip and instead do a hand knot. I decided to use my overlocker to finish most of the seams. I know, this is not 1950s appropriate, but it was fast and I think it would really serve the purpose of this project, which was to make a wearable toile. Some of the aspects did have to be sewn by machine, such as inserting the pocket on the side seam here, and yes, I did sneak a pocket into a slip. The neckline is finished with facings, one facing for the front and a facing for the back, in between which the straps are sandwiched, so that everything is finished nicely. I do really like finishing a V-neck with a facing, because I think it's the easiest way to do it. And here is my dress, but it's not quite finished. It still needs hemming, but we are taking a short break to go on a little side quest and attempt to dye it using magnolias from my garden. If you'd like to find out more about this experiment in natural dyeing, check out the video in the description box below. I think it was really fun. Because the dyeing process included heating up my fabric in different varieties of baths, I decided to hem it after to make sure that the fibers had time to stretch. And then I used my trusty leveler to mark the hem and cut it. As you can see, it did stretch a lot because some of the skirt is cut on the bias.
There was one last thing to do. The hem. I cut off what I needed, I folded it up, and then I hand sewed it into place with a whip stitch. And the dress, or slip, whichever you prefer, was done! I'm really astonished how such a simple pattern can actually be so flattering, and specifically because I had to change it so much. I had to add significantly to the pattern to make it my own measurements, but it still draped and fits so beautifully. I was really impressed with it. It was originally intended as a slip, but I actually found in it the perfect modern spring dress. It's super comfortable. I love that I made it out of a lightweight linen. And so it has just enough swish to make it sort of fancy and whimsical without it being very, very full. And yeah, it also reminded me that just because the original pattern was intended as a slip, it doesn't mean that's all it can be. As modern makers, we can adapt historical patterns and historical thoughts and methods to how we can wear them today. Hence why I added a pocket. So here is your PSA. 1950s slips actually make really cute dresses, and they're usually quite easy patterns to get a hold of, and they're also easy to draft because they are very simple. However, even though I love the outcome of this project as a dress, it wasn't quite what I intended it to be, which was a wearable mock-up for my big couture project. And so even though I got a really cute dress out of it, it wasn't quite the outcome I had hoped for. But that's an issue for another day. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.